What's up, you guys? This is Devin with CenturyFX Studios, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the rumored Canon R1. This is supposed to be the flagship of their new mirrorless full-frame lineup called the R series. Now, we just came out with the R5, which is one of the most popular Canon cameras and most infamous Canon cameras of all time. Now they're supposed to be coming out with an R1, the flagship, to compete with their new competition on the block, the new kid on the block, Sony. Now that Sony has come out with this new A1, a 50 megapixel beast of a flagship with 30 frames a second for the Olympics, also new technology for flash, also new technology for banding, new technology for flicker, all these things that plagued the mirrorless cameras in the past are now pretty much gone in the Sony world. And now Canon has to find some way to compete. Alright, so now Canon is slated to come out with the R1. This comes from Canon rumors. I'm not sponsored or anything like that. By the way, if you are trying to buy any of these newer cameras, R5, A7S III, if I get the R1 coming out, I'll get an affiliate link for that in the description below. Please check out the description below for any cameras that you might buy. Click on it. I'll get a commission back. It helps the channel. Click on it so I can keep making these videos and make them better, higher quality. And you guys don't have to complain about things that may or may not be high quality. If you're not investing in the show, how can I provide you with that quality? So go ahead, click those affiliate links in below. Also, subscribe to the Patreon. This helps the channel. Subscribe to this channel, like, it helps the algorithm, and let's keep going. All right, I'm reading this straight off my phone for you guys. Let's get right into it. Now, the first thing you see on the Canon rumor site for the R1 rumors is an 85 megapixel global shutter CMOS imaging sensor. All right, 85 megapixels. Now, I was just talking in my last video about the R5S. The R5S is slated to have like 90 megapixels. So 85 wouldn't be a far cry from that. So I believe it. Canon usually likes to show out and show off because they make their own sensors. They pretty much make everything themselves, and they control pretty much their entire, I want to say, their entire world they control. So a lot of things they have control over. They don't have to be beholden to any company making sensors, beholden to anything, any money or anything like that to any other company. They're their own engineers and they control a lot. So if they wanted to make an 85 megapixel sensor, they don't have to wait on the company to make it for them. So if they wanted to make this variation, they could, and it makes sense. So they're probably going to do it. Now, the global shutter. Now, for those of you who do not know what the global shutter is, the global shutter is a different type of reading shutter. Now, the way it works is if I'm not mistaken, in a circular fashion. And this helps the readout of the sensor because the global shutter won't give you those wavy lines that when you pan and scan across anything and stuff like that. And it's going to allow you to sync with any flash at any speed without having to use high-speed sync. Now, correct me if I'm wrong for people who use global shutters, but I'm used to those regular shutters from the CMOS sensors that are in the lower end bodies. Now, people who use like Hasselblads and more expensive cameras, correct me if I'm wrong, but the global shutter is supposed to eliminate all of the flash syncing issues. It's supposed to eliminate any rolling shutter effects because of the way the sensor is read out because of the curtain and how it closes in a circular fashion. So the global shutter defeats all those problems that any mirrorless camera has had in the past. Now, you know Sony has already made their newer shutter kind of thing, or it pretty much combats all the rolling shutter effects. I don't know exactly how they do it, but they have come up with a whole bunch of feats to defeat, so to speak, all the issues that plagued all of the older mirrorless cameras because of the electronic shutter. You couldn't use a flash with electronic shutter. You couldn't do this, that, and the other. It had flickering, it had banding. And hopefully this global shutter will help you defeat or completely defeat all these issues at 85 megapixels. Are you crazy? Okay. So, and the reason why 85 megapixels is such a big feat because flagship cameras tend to not have high megapixels. They usually are stuck at 18 megapixels, 20 megapixels. And with all that being said, you are now jumping from 20 megapixels from a flagship to 85 because the 1DX Mark III, which is supposed to be what this camera is upgrading to, the R1, it only had like 20 megapixels. And even though that's good for dynamic range and everything like that, a lot of people say it's better for noise and stuff like that. you were paying premium price for a lower megapixel camera because all the other cameras like the 5D series always had more megapixels than the flagship series, which was you paying more for. You're like, then why would you pay more for a camera that was less than megapixels? Well, it probably cost a lot of money for the companies to make those DSLRs go fast. And what you're really paying for is the speed and the processing speed of these cameras to shoot 15 frames a second, 16, 17, 18, 20 frames a second. But now, since these mirrorless cameras have come out, it seems like they don't have any problems with processing these images because there's no swinging mirror keeping them from taking an image or slowing things down. So now they have these higher megapixel bodies at these higher frame rates. So let's go to the next spec and see what Canon has in store. All right, so 85 megapixel sensor at 20 frames a second, and then 21 megapixels at 40 frames a second. Unlimited continuous shooting. Okay, all right. So Canon, if this is true, Canon has outsmarted Sony on this. Because Sony was like, oh, we could just do 50 megapixels at 30 frames a second. It makes too much sense for them to lower the resolution to the regular 20 plus megapixels, because that's what the 1DX Mark III had, and then increase it to 40 frames a second. Why? Because if you were used to having higher resolutions, you don't have to compromise your money by paying more for just a faster camera and not getting the resolution. You can get the resolution and still, like I said, get a reasonably high frames per second, and then you can also get a lower resolution, and you can still get those high frames a second. It's ingenious. I've never seen Canon do something like this. I've always said, with all these high megapixels and high frames a second bodies, you need lower variations programmed into those bodies so we can control how much we use. But if we don't get the option to dumb down maybe 50 megapixels to 25 or 30 megapixels, just to create a file size that's easier for us, and then use 50 when we want to, you strip a lot of control from the camera. But Canon was like, you know what? To create a camera that doesn't overheat, that doesn't give us issues, we can actually use our software to create it so where we can cut the resolution and still give them higher frames a second. Because it's always about, how much memory you're taking in versus how much you're putting out. And Canon has had some issues with it. Now, Sony really has had issues in the past with overheating. And this is this input versus output. If you put in a lot of work, for example, 30 frames a second, it's going to take a lot of processing power. And if you're taking them high megapixel pictures, it's going to dumb down how many pictures you can take for a second. But if you have low, megapixels, then you can take a lot more if you have low megapixels, you can take a lot more pictures in a second, because that's just how input versus output works. If you take a lot of megapixels, so basically making these higher end bodies is a ratio. It's a ratio of how much information you're taking in versus how much you're putting out to that camera. Now, the higher end bodies have always played on this. So the higher end bodies with high megapixels have always played this ratio of megapixels to frames per second. The more frames per second you tend to have, the lower the megapixels you can have, because it's all about how much image you can process at the time. Now, Sony was like, we can push that. We can go 50 megapixels and then give you 30 frames a second and really push it together. But Sony is fighting a memory game. The more megapixels you add, the more processing you're going to have to do. Therefore, if you have 30 frames a second and high megapixels, you're going to be straining the mess out of that camera. And Canon was like, hey, well, yeah, we still want high megapixels to give them what they paid for, but we're going to give them a variation where if they want to shoot 21 megapixels, they can shoot 21 megapixels, and then we're going to give them that benefit of our speed. Full sensor quad dual pixel autofocus. I don't even know what that means, and I know it's going to be amazing, because dual pixel autofocus, did I say dual pixel autofocus? It says full sensor large quad pixel autofocus. Now, obviously, this is a variation to the dual pixel autofocus, seen it in the videos of most of the new Canon cameras. Even the 80D, which I'm filming on now, has dual pixel autofocus, and it should be tracking me pretty well here. And it's at 1.8. So think about it. You get a camera that now has improved on one of the best autofocusing systems ever created in a camera, period. That's amazing, because a lot of people don't even need that in their camera. They're like, dang, well, people do need it in their camera, but a lot of people were amazed by this dual pixel autofocusing system. And that's the reason why a lot of people bought the M50. A lot of people buy these cameras because of how polished Canon specs are. Now, Canon may not give you a lot of specs, but now they seem to be tipping the hat, pretty much kicking Sony, because daggone, these specs are amazing. 15.5 EV plus. That's the dynamic range, and that's 15.5 stops of dynamic range. That's the highest I've ever seen in any Canon camera. The next thing would be the ISO range. Now, this is a little curious. Now, look at this ISO range. The ISO range goes from 160 to... Come on. Okay, so the ISO range is 160 to 1,683,400. All that means is your ISOs at higher ranges should be a little bit cleaner. That's all that means, but that number seems really, really high, and they might be hinting to some new information or new sensor technology. Oh, that's crazy. All right, now 5-axis IBIS image stabilization all the way up to 9 stops. That's a 1-stop improvement over what the 5 or R5 is able to do. So it should be better in IS. Let's cross our fingers. It was great in the R5. Now, I haven't had the R5 and I really want it, but from what I've seen on YouTube, I mean, that's why y'all need to support the Patreon and support the affiliate links in the description below, because I can get all these cameras, you know, eventually, and I can be able to tell you better than I can just talk to you about the rumors. Now, you got a 3.5, 33 megapixel nit 10-bit RGB OLED touch screen at 120 hertz. Wow, that's a lot of stuff, and it seems to be better than anything Canon has ever come out with. That's amazing. Electronic viewfinder. The electronic viewfinder is slated to be 9.4 megapixels at 120 hertz super speed. Okay, wow. A lot of this stuff seems to be new technology. I haven't even heard of a camera company rating the hertz value in their screens and their technology. So that sounds like something amazing. Now we get into the price. Wow, okay. The price for this camera is slated to be $8,500. Gracious. Okay. Now, in comparison to Sony's flagship with $6,500, a lot of people are going to go with the Sony variation if they're going to go flagship, because it costs a lot less. The Sony costs a lot less on the A1. But I got to give kudos to Canon for outthinking Sony. I have never seen Canon go the route that I have told them to go, as far as giving us control over what level of the camera that we want to use. If we want to use 50 frames a second, we can use 50 frames a second, or 40 frames a second. If we want to use the 50 megapixels, we can use that, or the 85. Make sure you put those levels in there so we can dumb it down if we need to. Like, for example, we can use 8,000th of a second shutter, but we don't always need to use 8,000th of a second shutter. So why don't we just dumb it down so we can use more of the camera and not be constricted to just using 85 or 1 megapixel out of the camera. So this is amazing on the Canon end. Of course, it's overpriced. I don't think a Canon camera has been this price since the cinema line. But I want to see what the video specs are, because I don't see anything that says anything about 8K or 16K. Canon 16K. But obviously, if they're going to come out with a camera that's $8,900 or $9,000, what did Canon rumors say it was? Canon rumors said it was $8,500. Then obviously those video specs are going to be high. But nobody ever said anything about the video specs. It's probably going to be what? Maybe 8K plus, and variations of 8K and 4K all throughout this camera for $8,500. But we'll have to see. I'm Devin with CenturyFX Studios. Tell me, you guys, what you think about the R1. What's going to have into it? Is it going to have better eye tracking autofocus? Is it going to have, quad pixel autofocus, or whatever they want to call it? Seems to be really, really cool. But what else do you think is going to have in it? For $8,500, that's a really, really expensive camera. But Canon is definitely pulling out all the stops, so to speak, for this camera. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Affiliate links, Patreon, support the channel, and I'll see you on the next video.